Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome everyone to Polycarp's Paradigm. My name is Eric Robinson, and I have a very special guest with me today, my dear friend and mentor, Jared Zimmerer. Welcome, Jared, to the podcast.
Yeah, man. Good to be with you.
Just for those of you who don't know Jared, he is a husband and father of 6. He got his Master of Arts in Theology from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, which is where I'm going currently. He's now working on his PhD in Humanities from Faulkner University, and he is the director of the Word on Fire Institute. So for those of you who don't know, Word on Fire is an amazing ministry under the leadership of Bishop Baron. And I know a lot of my friends out there do know Bishop Baron. He was a big influence on me, actually, becoming Catholic. And Jared, my friend here, is one of the biggest influences on me becoming Catholic because he was my sponsor into the Catholic Church. And for those of you who don't know, a sponsor is someone basically who's a disciple, someone who disciples you into the Catholic Church. They can vouch for you and say, hey, they're ready to become Catholic. And so real quick, before diving into your story, Jared, I just wanted to share with people how I first met you, because I just think this is hilarious. So I was, signing up for RCIA. I wanted to do RCIA, Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, to join the Catholic Church. And I was still very unsure of whether I was going to even become Catholic. So I just was in the parking lot of St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Grapevine. And I was just praying to the Lord. I was like, Lord, please let the RCIA director be really cool. Like such a stupid prayer.
You got this dork.
No. He actually answered it. Because I meet this guy named Jared Zimmerer. He's like 6'5". Are you 6'5"?
Almost, yeah.
Oh my gosh. And just, buff as can be. And just like such a cool guy. And we immediately hit it off talking about Lord of the Rings.
I think our first meeting we talked about Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's when it's like, okay, this is a sign from God. I'm supposed to become Catholic, and so that was such an amazing interaction. And I was like, okay, this is going well. And because I didn't know like any Catholics, you were kind enough to be my sponsor as well and disciple me. And so I'm excited to have this conversation many years after that moment.
That's crazy how many years have gone by already.
That was 5 years ago.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah. Amazing. And so back then you were working as the RCIA director at St. Francis and doing a lot of other things for St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Grapevine. And now you're the director of the Word on Fire Institute, and would just love to hear your story. I know you grew up Catholic, and so if you wouldn't mind just kind of starting from the beginning and how it was growing up in that environment, and just a little bit about yourself and your story.
Yeah, so I, North Texas boy. I was born and raised in Denton. I actually went to grade school and high school in Gainesville and Munster, so just small little towns, here in North Texas. My father was a cradle Catholic. He was a German Catholic from Munster, Texas, and my mom was actually Episcopalian when they got married.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she was from Georgia. They met while my granddad had some work here in Texas, and so my mother ended up converting to Catholicism right around the time that I had my first communion.
Okay.
And right around the same time, my dad was pretty nominally Catholic, a Catholic name. But then right around the time of my first communion, he started getting challenged by some of his, friends and stuff, that a lot of whom were Baptists and other Protestant denominations. And he was kind of like, I don't really know my own faith good enough to defend what we're talking about, but I know that's not what I believe, in regard to what they thought. And so he started doing a lot of research and had a pretty major conversion right around the same time that my mother came to the church.
Wow.
And so because of that, right around the time that I was, first communion age, they took the faith very seriously. They pulled me out of public school, put me in a Catholic school. it became a very normal thing for us to start praying the rosary together as a family. My parents got heavily involved, and still are involved, in an organization called the Apostolate for Family Consecration.
Okay.
Which in large part, their ethos is about family catechesis and sanctity of the family, based off of JP2's teaching mostly. And so they would have Bible studies, in large part based on their materials, every Friday for like 10 years growing up, when I was growing up. So every Friday they had people over, and, I knew that they were doing a Bible study.
Yeah.
That my parents also, when I was about 12, opened up a Catholic bookstore in our town of Denton. And I worked there for about 10 years of my life. And it kind of put me in a little bit of a place. So let me not go there just yet, but working there, it made me have to defend my faith, because people would go into that store way easier than they went to a church, to come and challenge somebody. But growing up, I loved being Catholic. I kind of saw it as part of my identity to be a Zimmerer, meant to be Catholic.
Yes.
That's what it was. And it was kind of more of that pride thing, than an actual, like, in love with Jesus thing.
Yeah.
And the actual thing I worshipped was probably sports.
Okay.
That growing up was more everything. All my efforts went into being the best basketball or football player I could be.
Okay.
And so I, still went to church and still did everything my parents asked me to do, and again, loved being Catholic, but it wasn't really something that hit me in the heart. And that even includes, my parents took us down to Batania, Venezuela, when I was about 10 or 11, because there was supposed Marian apparitions going on at the time. And the church hasn't approved those yet, but supposedly it's on the way or something. But anyway, so we went down there, and I had a pretty mystical experience while I was there with Mary, and it was certainly something that kind of hit me in the heart, and it's a big reason why I call myself, a big Mary devotion guy now, because she had a major role in my life. But
if you don't mind me asking,
sure,
what happened?
Well,
you don't have to share, but I'm so curious.
So the way the place was set up where she was appearing, it was just this huge kind of valley. And in that valley, they had built up this outdoor church, so it didn't have walls or anything. It was just 4 pillars and a big roof where you could have mass and everything. But then off to the side, there was this grotto where there was where she was supposedly appearing, kind of like with Bernadette, right? There was a grotto where she was kind of up in the side, right? Well, there was this fence around there where it was this chain link fence, and the place was absolutely packed. It was kind of chaotic whenever we were there.
Wow! And
here I was, a little kid, and I decided, I think I'm going to go over there and pray the rosary in front of that chain link fence and look up and see, where Mary's been appearing. So I go over there, and I have my eyes closed while I'm praying the rosary, and we're talking about like shoulder to shoulder packed. Like that packed. And I was sitting there praying the rosary by myself, and I remember thinking, or having in my mind, that I'm the only one here now, and it's just me and Mary. And for lack of a better term, because I don't like the term, it felt like almost like a trance-like state. You know? And I was praying, my rosary was silver. It was this, not pure silver by any means, but it was a silver rosary. And my dad came and tapped me on the shoulder because Mass was about to start, and I had the opportunity to be an altar server while I was there. So he tapped me on the shoulder, and I kind of came out of this like weird state, right? And I realized, wait, there's people here, and like I don't know where I'm at, kind of thing. Yeah. So I put my rosary in my pocket. When served at Mass, right after Mass, we were going to go have lunch. I pulled my rosary back out of my pocket, and it had turned. A lot of it had turned gold. So it was a pretty, and at first I went to my dad, I was like, Dad, my rosary got dirty. Like, what happened to it? He's like, Jared, that's not dirt. Like, it's gold. It's gold. So it happened, there was a mystical experience there with Mary. I still have that rosary and I treasure it to this day. But even after that, sports was still my focus. It just was. Man. But ever since then, Mary has always been a big part of my life. So I hold on to that experience pretty tightly. But anyway, after that, I, went to school and focused in on sports. And my sophomore year of high school, I had gotten hurt playing football. dislocated my knee playing in a football game as a defensive end. And it kind of honestly made me go to kind of a dark place where I was like, this thing that I've devoted my life to is now gone. Because the doctors were like, yeah, your knee is really messed up, and either we can go in and tear the whole thing up and reconstruct it, or you can start lifting weights to keep your knee strong. He's like, but you will always have problems with this knee. So, because my cartilage is pretty much gone. The ACL stretched but didn't rip, all this kind of stuff. So that's what got me into weightlifting.
Okay.
I was like, okay, well, if this is the route I'm going to go. So I kept playing sports. I had to wear this big knee brace anytime I played football or basketball and stuff. And still a decent athlete, but I knew after high school there was no chance I could go play anywhere because I just didn't want it to be worse. So I focused in on bodybuilding specifically. Yeah. And so I traded one lowercase g god for another one, and that was bodybuilding. So I focused in on that. I ended up going to the University of North Texas after high school, and it was just pretty much class in the gym. That was about it, I started getting into a little bit of the party lifestyle around that time for about a year when I was in college, and just the kind of normal, typical college hedonism that happens. You know? And right around that time, I met Jessica, and we actually met in a bar.
Okay.
Like good Catholics, we met in a bar. But, she, her and I didn't really have a serious girlfriend up until I met her. And we started dating pretty much right away whenever we met each other. And we dated for a little over a year, and that's right around that same time. I started having this kind of Augustinian moment where I was like, look, I've dated girls. I was going to all the parties. I had a really nice car. I was a bodybuilder, so I had this, bodybuilding body. Yeah. All that kind of stuff. And I was like, but I'm not happy. Yeah. What's happening? All these things I thought were going to make me happy are not. And so I originally actually didn't go to Christianity or the Catholic Church to try to find that answer of what's supposed to make me happy. I guess in my arrogance, or I thought it was cool, I actually went back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. I went back to Cicero and Epictetus and Seneca and a lot of the Stoics specifically I'm really drawn to. And they really talked a lot about moral excellence and duty and what they don't use these words, but what it means to be a man, and so that kind of woke me up a little bit to say no, there's something deeper here that I'm not doing. Growing up, I always had in the back of my mind, one day I'm going to be like Braveheart or something,
Yes.
But that opportunity never came, and I was seeking it in a different way through all this other stuff. And I realized oh no, this is how I can live that kind of Braveheart lifestyle is in the day to day. It's not going to war, and it's not doing that kind of stuff. That's maybe some people are called to that, but it wasn't me. And so I realized oh no, this to be Braveheart, you have to set this foundation of moral excellence, of living your life according to a code, all that kind of stuff. And right around that same time, so here I am dating Jessica, and my dad invites me to go down to Mexico City. There's the apostolate had a big evangelical work down there. They had a house down there. They were helping the poor, but then also mostly catechizing the Mexican people. And on the way down there, I read the story of Blessed Miguel Pro, particularly the Cristeros War, which for your listeners, if they don't know what that is, the Cristeros War happened in the early 1900s. And what happened was, in a country where it was about 97% Catholic, the government decided to outlaw Catholicism.
In Mexico?
In Mexico.
Oh, my goodness.
To the point where if you were seen giving sacraments or saying Mass, they'll kill you right in the street. It was kind of like what happened with the French Enlightenment, where, they were slaughtering people. And, so the Catholic Mexicans decided to fight back and started, getting violent and pushing back. And there was one priest in particular. His name was Miguel Pro, Father Miguel Pro. He was a Jesuit priest. And at the time, right when it started getting violent, a lot of the priests went back to Rome to try to figure out what are we supposed to do here. Yeah. And Miguel Pro originally did go to Rome, but he came back and he actually decided to start serving the people incognito. So he would dress up in normal day-to-day clothes, or he would be like an engineer or a blue-collar worker or something like that. And he would secretly be going around giving sacraments to families and saying Mass and baptizing babies and all that stuff. And he understood that perhaps the violence of the Cristeros pushback might be needed in some way to say, like, look, you can't step on us in this way.
Yeah.
But another path is the way of providing Christ to the people. We fight that way. He saw the sacraments as a way of fighting this injustice. And so he would do, there's a great story, one where, I call him like the James Bond of priests, because this guy would, number one, he had kind of a cohort of young boys that would go around as his little spies and find out about new babies so that he could go baptize them, or find out about a Catholic family that needed confession or something like that. And he would encourage them, don't be violent. Let's do this through Jesus. And there's a great story where at one point he was hearing a woman's confession in an alleyway. And he had kind of already gotten a little bit of a reputation of being a troublemaker. Like the government heard about him, they figured it out, and they saw him, and he sprinted down the other side of this alleyway. So they go around this corner and come try to find him. Well, as he's going on the other side of this alleyway, as he exits kind of where the buildings are, he grabs another man's hat and puts it on his head, puts his arm around a woman and says, "Don't worry, I'm a Catholic priest. Just keep walking." And the cops go right by him. Oh!
Wow.
So, like, he was kind of like God's spy, going in. And ultimately what happened was there was a bomb plot that was discovered on the governor at the time. And the governor decided, we're going to blame this on Miguel Pro. And so they went and got him and brought him in. Because at that time, he had kind of become a folk hero to the people. And so they knew, like, if we make a martyr out of this guy and he's not violent, we're going to have a problem. So they figured out a way to blame violence on him.
Okay.
So as he's walking up so they send him to a court, claim him guilty, send him to the firing range to get shot. And the guy, as he's walking up, is forgiving every single person holding a gun. And he goes and stands in front of them with a crucifix in one hand and a rosary in the other, and just screams, "Viva Cristo Rey," it means "Long live Christ the King."
Wow.
Right? And then they shoot him, right? And for some reason, even now I'm getting goosebumps, right? Thinking about that. And so that, I had an opportunity, I read that on the way down there, and then I had an opportunity to go to his shrine in Mexico City, which was just a little small thing with his picture and a little, like, dedication to him. And for some reason, man, that just punched me right in the heart.
It's like, that is a man.
Yeah. When I was like, I don't have something that I'm willing to do that for.
Wow.
Like, that ability to stare death in the face and embrace it. Like,
wow.
That's freedom. You know? Like, that's what it means to be fully alive. And so right around that time, that's what really kind of made me go, oh, wait, okay, I got to get out of this nonsense and take my life seriously. Yeah. And right around the same time, that's when I knew Jessica was the one I wanted to spend my life with. So I proposed to her. And
was she Catholic?
She was not. She was actually she was baptized Catholic as a young girl. Her mother left the church when she was about 2. And she was raised in a non-denominational church. And it's funny. I actually, so during our dating, she started going to church with me, and she had a couple Catholic friends. And so it wasn't too much of a stretch. But when I proposed, I said, no, I'm not marrying a non-Catholic, right? Yeah. And she was like, perfectly fine. So, our engagement time was actually her going through RCIA.
Wow.
And I sponsored her into the church. She came into the church, got all of her sacraments on our wedding day. So she got matrimony, first communion, and confirmation all on the same day. Her confession leading up to that,
Wow.
So it was a pretty amazing kind of grace-filled moment for us. And it was, along the way, the few things that she just kind of, she never was really all that attached to non-denominationalism. She didn't really understand the once saved, always saved thing. She just kind of felt like that's not realistic, and so it wasn't too difficult to explain Catholicism to her. And she's comes from an Irish Catholic family, so I say it's in your Irish blood. It's just part of who you are. And so she, 2 things that really just icing on the cake, done, ready to go. One was I showed her this video on Eucharistic miracles.
Okay.
And it just kind of enlightened her to, like, no, this is real. This is a real deal, And the other one was Marian miracles. Actually. Okay. So, which, John Bosco says the 2 great pillars of the church are the Eucharist and Mary. Wow. Right? So I think that kind of just drew her in, and now she's, incredibly devout Catholic, and
Yeah.
I call her more Irish Catholic than me because she just doesn't doubt anything. Whereas I'm more like, I want to figure out why.
Yeah.
She's like, no, the church says it, we're doing it.
Yeah.
She's just got that devotion in that way. But so anyways, my journey, I guess, involved a lot of people along the way for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents for sure were just incredible examples of good Catholics, and trying to do their best to help this world through relationship with Jesus. And now we've been married for 12 years. We have 6 kids.
Wow.
And so it happened really quick. Apparently we're both very fertile, I guess. But I still still love weightlifting. I originally, when I started getting into ministry, I wrote a book called The 10 Commandments of Lifting Weights, which kind of integrates Catholic spirituality and weightlifting. And right around that time I started speaking. I was getting invited to go speak to like youth groups and stuff like that. And then I know you're doing a series on theology of the body right now. So I actually worked for a theology of the body organization for about a year. And then from there, got the invitation from Father Flynn to come work at St. Francis.
Okay.
Right around the time when I was working for Theology of the Body is whenever I got introduced to, at the time, Father Baron. The CEO of Word on Fire is Father Grunow. And he had posted on Facebook that he had left my book in a plane going to England. So I said I'd be happy to send you another one. And he happened to be in Arlington, Texas at one point. And he came down here. We filmed a pull-up contest, and
nice.
he wiped the floor with me at that time. And so next time we're going to do a bench press contest. But anyway, that was kind of the beginning of that relationship of kind of realizing God putting people in my life that guided me more towards ministry. And so that relationship grew, and as I was working at St. Francis, I was still writing for their blog, and we would have every now and then regular meetings where we would read scripture and pray together and figure out like what is Word on Fire called to, and it was more from a voluntary basis. And then at one point I got an opportunity to go up to Mundelein Seminary, which is where at the time Father Baron was the rector, and I spoke to the seminarians about masculinity and about what I call the new asceticism, of basically kind of seeing the fitness realm as a way in which like the greats of like John the Baptist, Catherine of Siena, these great ascetics of the past. But perhaps now the world needs a different kind of asceticism. The gym offers a very specific kind of discipline of the diet, and it's not the fasting is involved, but it's a different style. But anyway, so that was the beginning of that relationship, and then after working at St. Francis for about 4.5, almost 5 years, I got a call that some of the things we were praying about, Father Baron at the time said, I'm really ready to move forward with this, and I want you to be the guy. And then he became a bishop, out in L.A. And so then I came on to them, came on with them full time, and we launched the Institute last year, and it's been going really, really well. So it's been amazing to see what God is trying to do through. I personally think Bishop Baron is one of the great shining lights of the church right now. That what he's been able to accomplish in the work of evangelization is saintly. And it just ultimately is. I'm a big Fulton Sheen guy. He was another person who was involved in my kind of conversion along the way of seeing him. That's why we have a son named Fulton. So it's I guess that's kind of the basics of my story. Obviously, I never thought a meathead would be doing what I do, but at heart, I think I'm still a meathead.
So what is it like working with Bishop Baron and knowing him over the years and developing that friendship? Like, are you just kind of amazed at, his practice and he actually practices what he preaches, and he's a humble man. He's a servant, but he's also on fire evangelist. And so, what is it like kind of interacting with him? And because he's a pretty big deal, especially in the Catholic world, but even beyond that, like I saw him. Ben Gordon
Peterson.
Yeah, he
Ben
interviewed.
Shapiro and all those guys.
Yeah, and he spoke at Google and Facebook and like all these major places. So he's like getting out there and getting the word on fire out there. And so what is that like, kind of being on that kind of level, that stage, but with someone who's humble and saintly, like you say?
I think he's one of the great intellects of our time too. You know, I mean, the eloquence that he can speak of philosophy and theology is unbelievable. It's just unreal. And so he's on that level whenever he is preaching and spreading the word and all that. But man, in person, he is just the most normal guy you'll ever meet. He's funny. He's laid back. Most of the time when we're sitting around, he'd rather just talk about The Simpsons than a lot of, these higher intellectual things. He can certainly get into that, and we do a lot, but he's unbelievably prayerful. Every time I'm there with him, we're always having mass at his residence, and he is a true spiritual father. And between him and Father Steve Grunow, who's also a spiritual father to all of us at Word on Fire. I mean, we really are a big family there. And Bishop Baron, he's one of those guys that's driven in this mission, and that's what we need. Is like, I'm not going to take second best when it comes to spreading the gospel. Right. So he does. That's why everything we produce is so high quality, and so we do not spare anything to make sure it's the best. When it comes to evangelization, and his mission of the best as we can, going beyond the Catholic kind of bubble. Yeah. And saying we've got to preach to what we call the nuns, NONES, right? This rise of unaffiliation, which is growing rapidly. It's like 25% of the country now. Wow. And so that mission, which is being fulfilled in ways like talking with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin and all of this stuff, it's allowing an opportunity to get into that world. And I think Bishop Barron's the perfect personality for it, because he's not judgmental. He's not, fire and brimstone. He's very calm, cool, kind of laid back guy, but unbelievably intellectual and eloquent in the way that he's able to express things. So I think God has placed a very specific grace in Bishop Barron, and getting to call him my friend and my spiritual father is one of the great moments of my life, for sure. It's funny because the first time I presented in front of him, I was unbelievably nervous.
I bet.
But now knowing him, I'm like, he wasn't judging me at all. He was just there to enjoy what I was going to say. So I mean, it's certainly a gift.
That's incredible. Going back to what you were talking about with the weightlifting and being like a new asceticism, I just would love to hear you kind of unpack that a little bit. Yeah. And also, since I am in this series right now of Theology of the Body, this is kind of like a break between parts 1 and part 2. But I do want to get your thoughts on authentic masculinity as a Catholic, as a Christian, and in this world that's becoming increasingly secular. Like, what does it mean to be an authentic man in this society that seems so confused about a whole bunch of things? So we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on those things.
Yeah. As far as the weightlifting thing, I mean, part of it was actually when I started taking my faith seriously, I started thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do with this bodybuilding thing? Is this okay in the church? Because you're pretty body focused, and you're so concerned about your diets that you've got abs and all this kind of stuff. And I've competed in bodybuilding and stuff, and the more I was reading Theology of the Body, the more I was reading the pagan Greeks and Romans, and an understanding of what it means to be a human, you realize that essentially we're made of a mind, a body, and a soul, right? Those are the three aspects of what it means to be a human person. And part of what John Paul II was doing was fighting the Cartesian understanding of separating the soul from the body, right? That the soul is kind of trapped in this kind of Platonic, shell. Yeah. And the best thing that we can do is kind of relinquish the body and focus on the soul, or there's the flip of it, focus on the body and quit worrying about the soul. And what I kind of just came to an understanding of was, no, the right thing to do is to realize you're made of a mind, body, and soul. And so you push each one of those things as hard as possible. Wow. That's part of the reason I got into the master's program was like, no, I want to know this stuff. I want to push my mind. I want to try to understand difficult concepts. I want to be able to speak like Bishop Barron. I want to live on that level too, mentally. But then at the same time, it's the whole Greek notion of I forget how it's said in Greek, but asics is what it's kind of based on the shoe, right? That's
what
okay. It's basically a well-formed mind inside of a well-formed body. So it's an understanding that the body is not just this shell that you're kind of walking around with. It's not an appendage. As John Paul II would say, it's part of who you are as an individual. It says something to you.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that you're a male and you have a male appendage says something to you about who you are, you know. And so if that's true, then what God has given us is this gift. And it's kind of like if I was to give my wife a Corvette and she just treats it like crap, you know, fills it up with bad gas, you know, speeds, doesn't fix things, never takes care of it. It's a little bit of a pointing at the person giving the gift, saying, I don't really care about this gift all that much because I'm not taking care of it.
Wow.
So to integrate then the body and say, no, I want to be fit. I want to be healthy. I want to take care of myself. You know, part of the back of my mind is I also want to be super strong. I want to be, you know,
I want to bench however much you bench now, 420 pounds.
Yeah, so there's that like side of it. And I think that what you learn in the gym can teach you things about the mind and the soul in a much more concrete way. So same thing as, you know, I'm not a marathon runner or a swimmer or any of these other things, but, you know, anything that's like the healthy, fit lifestyle, it's difficult, right? You have to like chisel away at the weak spots in order to get better and better and better. You know, in order to run a marathon, you got to start by running 1 mile.
Yes.
You know, and sometimes that means running half a mile first or taking 10 steps. You know, like it takes those moments and it takes kind of like climbing the hill to get up there. And it's the same way in the mind and in the soul that like, look, I wish I was as pure as St. Francis of Assisi, but I'm not. And so I do the best I can with what I've got to work on my detachment, to work on my humility. And that means every single day chiseling away, and it's hard, and it's, you know, you fall and all this kind of stuff. And it's the same thing in the gym. Like sometimes you're going to pull your back by doing too much deadlift, right? You're going to put too much weight on there and you're going to jack your back up. Well, go heal up, get back to it. You know what I mean? Like don't dwell on it. Don't, you know, you got to keep going. You got to keep doing your thing. Yeah. And so the gym taught me that when I was young of like, you do have some control over what your life is about. Like we forget that we have willpower sometimes, you know, and that does play a role in our discipleship. I mean, obviously we rely on grace a lot and the gifts of God, but there's the human aspect of it too.
We have to cooperate with that grace. Yeah.
Exactly. Grace built on nature, right? And so when it comes to this kind of new asceticism, it's an understanding of the full human person as mind, body, and soul, and you push as hard as you can in each one. And the soul is obviously the most important. You lose that, you lose eternal life, right? Right. But it's kind of one of those things of like, take a look at each aspect of your life in those 3 areas, and how are you doing in your life? Yeah. And if you're not doing good enough, make the sacrifices to make it. So the new asceticism is a way of kind of seeing specifically the body in light of JP2's theology of the body as, you know, in the past, like say, for example, you know, John the Baptist or Catherine of Siena or many of these others that phenomenal saints, and they were ascetics in their own way. I mean, some of them there were stories of saints who had fasted on nothing but the Eucharist for like years, you know. Or John the Baptist, who goes to the desert, has a hair shirt, and eats crickets or whatever, you know.
Locust honey. That's my diet.
You know? So, but I can't do that.
Right.
You know, I can't do that as a husband and a father. You know, the average American typically can't do that kind of stuff. And not all of us are called to that. That's a very rare gift. You know? If I ate nothing but the Eucharist, I would die of starvation because I that's not how I work, you know. Yeah. I'm just not there, you know, spiritually, I guess, or just that's not my grace.
It's not your calling.
Grace. Exactly. So the way the new asceticism is kind of understanding that, like, maybe the way to view the body and a way to fight that Cartesian reality of seeing the body as a shell is to rather focus on increasing its strength, increasing its health. You know, not in a way that's vain or egotistic, although that does seep in, you know, but that can seep in for anybody. You don't have to be a bodybuilder to be egotistic, right? Yeah. A lot of the people I've met that are egotistic are actually outside of the gym. You know?
And alternatively, like laziness can seep in if you don't get into it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's a way to kind of just see the holistic nature of the human person and say, like, the body has a major aspect to this, and it can teach you something in the mind and in the soul. And you see this in the fitness world all the time of somebody getting involved in fitness, and it changes the rest of their life. You know, they start living according to like a higher code than what they maybe were living in. I mean, for example, Dorian Yates, who was Mr. Olympia back in the 80s and 90s, he was in juvie and found the weights, completely changed his life, became Mr. Olympia, and now he's pretty well off, because he changed his life. He said, no, I can do something about my life, that I'm not stuck in this reality. And I think it's the same thing in the mind and the soul. You know, when people think, I can't understand that concept, it's too high. Well, push it. You know, do what you got to do to figure out how to get there. You know, read. Like, you know, I challenge guys specifically, like, when's the last time you read a book? You know?
Yeah.
Because if you're not reading, if you're not, doing something about training and moving the body and all that, if you're not praying, like, what are you doing? You know, like, money ain't going to make you happy, man.
Yeah.
You know? So maybe you're working your tail off, fine. But that's not what a good life is.
Right.
You know? Aristotle, Plato, all those guys were talking about what it means to be a good life, and none of them talked about. You know, that's before Christ and everything. Like, they just understood by human nature, these things are not going to make us happy.
Yeah.
So we have to live a good life in accord with higher purpose.
And God calls us to be excellent.
That's right.
Like it even says, I think in the book of Proverbs, like someone who's excellent at their work, someone who's excellent in their life, will sit before kings. And I love that. And I love that virtue is often translated as excellence.
Yes.
And so we are called to be excellence because that gives glory to God.
Yeah.
Like when we are, growing in virtue, when we're growing in being everything God has made us to be, it's like we're giving him so much glory when we do that. And so
I think as Christians too, part of, especially today with evangelization, is as much as we don't want to admit it, appearances have a lot to do with spreading the gospel. How we look and act as Christians has a lot to do with living according to the gospel.
Because we're such an image-driven society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so if we are in shambles, and don't get me wrong, Christ comes to the people in shambles. He came for the people in shambles, right? But when it comes to evangelization, right, there's a certain amount of light that needs to be there, you know? And if you're pushing yourself, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be the next Robert Baron, you don't have to be Dorian Yates, you don't have to be these things. But just saying, like, no, I am going to take my life very seriously so that when I'm on my deathbed, I don't look back and go, I wish I did. You know, you give it everything you've got. And I think that's a very attractive thing. That's where the Miguel Pro came in. It was like, oh my gosh, like, that's the kind of, like, death I want. And I'm like I'm ready, man.
Yeah.
Like, let's do this, you know?
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's where the whole new asceticism idea kind of came out.
Yeah.
In regard to masculinity, as I said, part of my conversion was trying to figure out what does it mean to be a man. And I think that it's changed over the past 4 to 5 years, but, the idea of being a man in the past has always been the guy who's sitting on the couch with a beer watching football, or the guy who is chasing money as if there's no tomorrow, or the guy who's chasing girls as if there's no tomorrow. And it's more of a selfish modality. And I think it's changed a little bit in the more recent years because it's kind of calmed down from this, like, what you might call toxic masculinity, this kind of selfish masculinity, more into more of like a metro type of masculinity. Almost like the desire maybe is like you want to be more in touch with your emotions, and the pendulum is swinging too far. It's like, yeah, sure, you should be in touch with your emotions, but not to the point where you're, a crying, weakling. Like there's some strength that still needs to be there too. Yeah. Because it's a different kind of pride. Now that you're going from one extreme pride to the other. And so what I say is that, ultimately the best way to explain what masculinity is by looking at Christ on the cross. That's masculinity. Wow. It's dying for the world, right? And I think that's what JP2 is trying to point out, with the theology of the body, is that in Christ we see the perfect man, right? And so understanding his life, but the apex of that being the sacrifice on the cross. And so to be a man is to relinquish yourself of selfish desires and to live for the other, right? As other, right? Which is authentic love. And I think that the idea of this kind of new asceticism, or even just the holistic understanding of the human person and pushing yourself as much as possible, you can't self-sacrifice in the way that you should unless you do those things. I just firmly believe that. Because if I'm not taking care of myself in my health, if I'm not taking care of myself in my soul, if I'm not, lively in my mind, all of that, I'm not at my best for my family. I'm not at my best for my job. I'm not at my best for my parish. I'm not at my best for Jesus, ultimately. And so to be a man, you've got to find that ability to be, I say, Christ was a lion to the Pharisees and a lamb to the sinner, right? And that's what a man is. Like there's times where, take your stand, fight back, do what you got to do. Yeah. But with the gentle, humility and with sinners and with women and children and other men who are sinners, be a lamb. Like that. It's this. I think, unfortunately, modern society with men and women, they've closed the spectrum of what it means to be a man to stereotypes. I like to use the example of growing up. I always used to watch John Wayne all the time. My dad was a huge country, or Western movie guy. So I'd watch him all the time. But then we would also watch Jimmy Stewart, right?
Okay.
Not the same guys, right? Yeah. Unbelievably masculine on both sides. Yeah. One guy, though, is kind of more the silent, hard-nosed, leather-skinned, sheriff type. The other guy is kind of more gentle, fast-spoken, and willing to take a stand in a different way. Yeah. Two different body types, two different styles, all that, but still just as masculine. It's different styles of masculinity. Or if you look at Francis of Assisi and Don Juan of Austria, the great hero of the Crusades. This guy goes off and fights, and he's got the whole thing. But then you've got Francis of Assisi, who is humble and homeless and, completely relinquished with the self. Yeah. Both men, they're both masculine. And what we've done in modern society is shrunk that to a very small amount of stereotype. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where part of this transgender thing is coming around and all this stuff, because they don't understand that, no, to be a female, you can have a spectrum. Yeah. You might be a Joan of Arc, or you might be a Therese of Lisieux. It's fine. Yeah. You're still a woman. It doesn't change anything. Right. Same thing with men, right? You might be a John Wayne or you might be a Jimmy Stewart. It's it's fine. That's all masculinity. Because the principle of it is virtue and living for the other. And it's not a matter of say my son starts to play with, something that girls play with. It's well, that doesn't mean he wants to be a girl, right? It just means that he maybe has a softer side, and that's fine. Yeah. Perfectly fine. Yeah. I've got one son that is kind of violent in nature, and so we love to box and we love to wrestle and all this kind of stuff. We got another son who just wants to live in imagination and talk about books and hobbits. And, it's that's fine. That's all within the spectrum. It's fine. Yeah. So I think that part of being a man is knowing Jesus. I wouldn't say part. I guess that is what it means to be a man. Mm-hmm. In order to live a masculine life, you have to have your ideal of what does it mean to be a man. And typically we do that by individuals. Yeah. And I think that, obviously as a Catholic, I'm going to say Jesus is the ideal. Yeah. We have kind of images of the ideal throughout, but ultimately they're pointing to the perfect man who is Jesus. So, anyway,
and it's amazing to me that Jesus himself identifies as someone who is meek and lowly in heart. And at the same time, he is that lion to the Pharisees and says, "You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you two escaping sin?"
Even to Peter, right?
Even to Peter, get behind me, Satan. And but at the end of the day, I think you're right. It all comes back to Christ and him crucified. This mind-blowing revelation to me, it's not new for Catholics out there, but for me, that love being the total gift of self. And that's what Christ that's exactly what he did on the cross. He gave himself totally for his bride, the church. And he gave himself for the world, even his enemies. Yeah. He loved his enemies, and he loved his disciples even to the end. And that to me is just, you're right. That is the epitome of masculinity. That's the epitome of humanity. We're all called to be that gift of self. Women just do it in a different way. Right. But everyone's called to, give themselves in sacrifice. And I love that. And I love being inspired by the stories of the saints, too. Same here. And I loved hearing about Blessed Miguel Pro, and oh my goodness, this is so amazing. Well, there's one concept in the Catholic Church that I touched on before in an interview I did with my friend Ethan, but it's the idea of offering up your sufferings for other people, for the salvation of the world, even in union with Christ and him crucified. And so actually not just thinking of Christ and Him crucified as something that happened 2,000 years ago, but something that we can actually enter into a mystery that, because He's God, it transcends our limitations. And so we can enter into that. And so as you're talking about weightlifting, as you're talking about pushing your body, you know, it was actually a Catholic friend of mine that challenged me, like, hey, when next time you work out, offer that workout up for so-and-so or for something. Yeah. Like, don't just let it fly by. Like, this suffering that you are going to experience in your workout, like, let it mean something. Yeah. And I just think that concept to me is revolutionary. Like, I can actually enter into the gospel every day in a fresh way. I don't know if that's something that you talk about a lot with, like, the new asceticism.
My grandma always used to say, offer it up anytime something would happen.
Yeah.
Like, you fall off your bike, offer it up. You know, you lose a basketball game, offer it up. You know, that kind of stuff. And I think that I work out in my own garage, and so I call it the monastery because it's kind of like just nice quiet place where I just get to go in there. And of course, my kids are in there most of the time with me. But you really get to. There's kind of a ritualistic aspect of it, you know, of like you getting your mind prepared, you're going through the motions and stuff. Same thing like when you're running, like you got to stretch, you got to get ready. It's in a way can be understood as a type of prayer. I mean, it's you're never removed from God's presence. Therefore, what you do is always should be considered as a prayer and praise, right? That you're there with God. And so when it comes to suffering, I mean, I think one of the best understandings of the problem of evil is that suffering can be useful, right? That we don't understand God's purpose of the suffering in the moment. Because, in fact, Bishop Baron uses the example of, imagine if you just found a couple of pages of Lord of the Rings and it was right before Frodo has to throw the ring into Mordor, right? And you're like, what kind of story is this? What the heck? But you don't understand the bigger context of it, right? And so that little bit of suffering might be just a drop in the ocean, but you have no idea what it's doing in kind of a spiritual realm, right? And so being able to offer up and voluntarily offering it up, right? I mean, some of the greatest saints in the world, that's why they were fasting, is because they were offering up that suffering for the good of souls. And so not only is it helping you as an individual, but you can absolutely offer it up for other people too.
Yeah. It's so funny because, like, and if people grow up Catholic, they're used to, like, that terminology. But for, like, people that come into the Catholic Church, that's, like, a revolutionary concept. And it's so funny to me because I always wondered what Paul meant in Colossians when he says, now I rejoice in sufferings and I rejoice in the afflictions for the sake of the body. Yeah. And that whole concept of he's uniting himself, he's making up what was lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, for the sake of the body, is amazing to me. And I think one important thing that ties back into what we're talking about with masculinity is when we fall into sin as men, it's usually when we take our eyes off the battle. So like King David, it was when he like didn't go out to war that he was on the rooftop and looked and saw Bathsheba and fell into like hardcore sin, adultery, murder. And fortunately he repented of that later on. But like, what a lesson to us that this idea to me of offering it up and actually uniting our sufferings daily, carrying the cross is a way of entering the battle. Whereas if we neglect that in any given day, we're more prone to sin. If we're in the battle, if we're in the fight, then we're actually going to be winning. I love viewing, like we both now, and thanks to you, I do have a Marian devotion, but viewing the rosary especially as a weapon, as a sword, as like my prayer, as like my spiritual weapons. Like I'm going to actually fight this battle. Like we are in a war against Satan and the demons and against the world, the flesh, and the devil, you know. We're in that battle every day, and so we need to wake up and realize it and fight. And I love one thing you said to me when I was going through RCIA, because I was like, I don't get this whole Mary thing, and like, what does this have to do? And I think we were talking about Lord of the Rings as well, probably. And you tied in how Lady Galadriel is like a type of Mary and how she gives gifts and all these things. And then you told me about how, as men, we need a woman to fight for. We need a lady to fight for, and she is Our Lady. And
the Queen Mother.
The Queen Mother. That we fight as knights in the army of Mary.
Especially in the medieval times, the Queen Mother represented everything that was good about the country. And so when you go to fight, she would come out and come say, like, I'm giving you my blessing to go fight for this country. Because she represents everything good, you know, about this country. In the same way, Mary represents everything good about the church and the relationship between the divine and human. I mean, she was the channel for it, and so in a way, fighting for her. And I one of my favorite books is called Spiritual Combat by Lorenzo Scupoli.
Okay.
Within the first or second page, he says, every day when you wake up, you put your feet on the ground, realize you're on a battlefield. And unless you fight, you're going to die. That's what he says.
Wow.
And I think that, another example out of Scripture is also Samson, right? The minute, he has his long hair, all this stuff. He's got the glowing locks and all that. He's fighting. He's out there fighting the Philistines. Mm-hmm. He's, kills 1,000 with a jawbone of a donkey or something like that, The minute he takes his eyes off of that and focuses on something else, and almost to, of course, partially faults of his own, but the principalities were coming in and whispering and saying things to him, and then without him even trying, they cut away his strength, right? And then he can't fight, right? Yeah. And that's what sin does to us, right? Whenever we take our eyes off the battle and we start, focusing on the wrong things, and you're absolutely right. And I think that to understand the spiritual life as combat, I think is important for men. I think we're natural fighters. It's what we want to do. And the difficulty is that, we're not typically, unless you're a soldier, and God bless them, but most of us are not fighting in an actual war, in a physical war. Mm-hmm. But this is a more real war, actually, that we're talking about now. We're talking about souls. So it gives us an opportunity to kind of like feed that Braveheart desire that we've got. To say, no, this is what you do. And it's almost more, at times, there's the difference between red martyrdom and white martyrdom. Red martyrdom is actually being killed. Mm-hmm. White martyrdom is the day-to-day relinquishing of the self. And sometimes that's harder.
I think it is. I really do. Because I've always wanted to be a red martyr. And it was actually just a few years ago, I think you were the one explaining to me white martyrdom, and I was like, wow, that's hard. To die to yourself every day and to actually, live every day as carrying my cross. Yeah. That's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the great John Vianney, whenever he was presented, he was given a Marian apparition, and she said, I want to offer you the red martyrdom or white martyrdom. Or not John Vianney. Maximilian Kolbe. Sorry. He accepted both. Yeah. And I think we're all called to that for sure, but the vast majority of us called to a type of white martyrdom, And to see those small sacrifices that you make in, little small things like, for example, changing diapers or doing dishes or, all the little things that sometimes can feel like little annoyances. It gives you a much more peaceful way to view these things. That, like, this isn't, drudgery, and it's not something to complain about. It's the way in which I fulfill my Christian duty. Yeah. And we wish it was things like Joan of Arc, and we wish it was, going out and doing that kind of stuff. But in all reality, God works in the small. When Jesus goes behind enemy lines as a baby, that's a major implication on how God operates. Yeah. And that's how we need to understand our operation too. That, like, Teresa's little way, Teresa Lisieux's little way. This woman who never left the convent, died at 24, becomes a doctor of the church and a patroness of missionaries. Right? And she didn't really, it was just her understanding of the spiritual life that did that, So, like, that little way, the small, gentle things, or was it in The Hobbit when, I forget exactly how he says it, but it's the small things in life that actually make a major difference. Yeah. We want to be in the big wars, but sometimes it's the little hobbit that just goes behind enemy lines. That actually stops the evil. And
that totally combats the pride of the enemy. When these little hobbits are, in our humble ways, we are actually doing a lot to further the mission and to carry that ring into Mordor and ultimately destroy it. And, man, that's awesome. So, Jared, any last comments for our listeners here, and just any last encouragement about perhaps evangelism, perhaps any last word to men out there or to women? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, the church teaches that evangelization is the meaning and purpose of the church. that we exist to evangelize. That's in Evangelii Nuntiandi. And so when we think of being Christians, when we think of being part of the church, we have to be very aware of, are we fulfilling our duty to evangelize? Are we actually going out and spreading the gospel? Are we actually, and it's going to take different forms, and some individuals, you might be with that same individual for 10 years before they finally come around to say, you know what, I think I'm ready to embrace Christ or something like that, to see the long game in it. But to always understand that, like, as a baptized priest, prophet, and king, you represent Christ in the world, and the things you say, the way we handle it, including social media. I kind of have this big, block in my heart right now for social media because it's getting so angry. And I feel like, as Christians, we really need to help kind of clean that up, and let's get back to helping people desire holiness. But I think that today the need for evangelization is even greater than it's been in the past 100, 150 years. Because, man, people are broken. And I love that you're doing stuff on theology of the body, because I think that there's a certain healing aspect that comes to starting to understand that realm of the human person. And so I think that if I was to encourage anybody to evangelize, it's like, take that as part of your spiritual life. Like, that's what it is. It's, if you're not spreading Christ, the one time I was asked, I forgot who even asked me this, but if you're not spreading Jesus, can you really claim to know him? Because the way you react to the transcendentals, the goodness, truth, beauty, is you want to share it.
Right.
And Christ is the perfection of all of those transcendentals. So if you've met him, the automatic reaction should be wanting to share it.
Yeah.
And so if you're not having that desire, start hitting the scriptures, start, praying more relentlessly, start asking for those graces to say, I want to help spread the good news. And part of what we're doing at the Institute is helping people understand how to do that well.
Yeah.
Because there are times, and it's funny whenever you get into trying to do this well, there's times where you're like a fire hose and you come in and you're like, I'm going to conquer the world by myself, and spread the gospel as much as I can. And there's something beautiful about that. There absolutely is. But in regard to the subjective pedagogy of the individual and how God's working on an individual, that may not be what that person needs. Like I remember when you and I met, I had already done a few RCA classes and directed those, and you start to understand, where is this individual and what do they need? So just to unveil something for you, I guess, is right off the bat, I could tell you liked heroism. That was something that you were drawn to. And so with the Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. Yeah. So I talked to you about saints a lot.
Yeah, you did.
Wow. And it's not like it was a strategy. I wasn't trying to strategize anything. It was more like, this is something that this guy would probably be interested in.
Yes.
And this is a way to introduce him to Jesus in the Catholic Church,
Wow.
And so it's trying to understand, where's this individual at? Like the other day I went and got a haircut, right? And this girl was cutting my hair, you could tell. Christian, probably doesn't go to church, those kinds of things. And I always get asked, what do you do? And I always get asked, are you married? Do you have kids? So when I say I'm the director of a bishop's institute, and then I'm also married and have 6 kids, they're like, "What? Who the heck is this weirdo?"
And I'm 33.
yeah. So it's like but like knowing that at that time, that might just be enough to just tell them, like, yeah, I love my faith and I have a big family. Like, there doesn't necessarily need to be more at that moment.
Yeah.
It might just be that shining light in that little instant. Or, sometimes, like Mother Teresa used to say that, like, look, these people are starving, like literally starving.
Yeah.
Me sharing the gospel with them right off the bat isn't going to, like, they're like, they need bread right now.
Yeah.
So to understand the individual in that way, whether it's your family, your friends, understanding that, like, God's working on all of us in different ways.
Yeah.
We all have our own wounds, our own brokenness, all these things that God's trying to heal, and you might be a conduit of that grace in some way. And so the best thing you can do is to learn about that person and like let them share their story. Let them tell you what interests them and then speak to that, which is part of the pushing of the mind so that you can start to speak to all of these things, you know. One of the guys that works here, he said his dad used to say that you probably need to watch some football just so that you can talk to people about it, because he loves philosophy, but not everybody's going to want to talk about philosophy. You may have to start with football and then grow up to, these bigger things.
Yeah.
And that's what Bishop Baron's so good at, right? He's got this wide range of things that he can talk about, For example, we were talking the other day about, if we were to get on Joe Rogan, how would we work on evangelization with him? Or, what advice would you give? I said, well, the first thing they need to know is who's the MMA champ of the world right now? Who's the boxing champ of the world right now? They need to know those kinds of things to talk to that person about, this is what interests you, this is what we're involved in, I like that stuff too. And then you create that ground of trust. And then now you build from there, and you're able to start kind of providing the Christian truths within that. But you have to be friends. We as evangelists, we have to be careful not to always be the sword, but always be the friend. Sometimes just being a good Christian friend might be the best thing a person gets in their life. So anyway, that would be, I guess, my advice.
And how could people find more information about you and about Word on Fire?
So Word on Fire would be wordonfire.org. That would be the main website. My institute, or the Bishop Baron's Institute, is wordonfire.institute. We've got some videos on there that can learn more about it. You can find me on social media, just looking up Jared Zimmerer. I might be the only one, I don't know. But on Instagram, Facebook. I'm off Twitter now. It's focused on Facebook and Instagram now. But that'd be the main two places, wordonfire.org and wordonfire.institute.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jared. I really appreciate it.
It's been fun.
Awesome.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.